The final presenter will be the senior economist and the head of Global Perspectives Studies Unit at the FAO of Rome, no other than Dr. Josef Schmidhuber.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues on the panel. It's both a great honor and a great pleasure for me to be here. Also, thanks for affording me the opportunity to present some of the results we've been creating over the last couple of weeks and months in preparation of the World Food Summit that will take place in November. Let me also start with a health warning. What you will consume now is work in progress. It's not the final word. We are still working on that, but we have a first set of results. Let me add to that I just received an email from headquarters in Rome essentially indicating that there is no green light yet for the 2025 goal, which is essentially a euphemism, at least for me in conference speak, that it's not going to fly. So we probably don't have the 2025 goal reached or launched at the conference, but nonetheless it may be interesting for you to see what we proposed as an investment plan for that. Now, the first challenge is, of course, operating the equipment. A lot has been said about the background. In fact, much better and much more eloquently than I could ever do. Let me nonetheless add a couple of things that we think are important from an investment perspective. Now, you've heard already that investment, particularly public investment in agriculture, has been declining. In fact, it has been declining quite rapidly, particularly as a share of total ODA. It has declined from, well, the top level was about 16% in 1983 to about 3% in the 2000s, and it has increased slightly ever since, but not above 5%. It's between 4 and 5%. The same actually happened for a long period of time in developing countries with public investment. And in fact, with the exception of FDI coming up recently, it also held for private investment. So we actually have seen quite a massive neglect of agriculture. And I'm not saying that this neglect of agriculture was the prime cause of what we witnessed in 2007-2008, i.e. the price hike, but it was certainly a factor that contributed to it, and it also is a factor that even today made agriculture much less resilient to economic shocks, such as the one we've seen in 2007-2008. These are the negative things. There are also quite positive things, and in fact they come out of Latin America. I think it shouldn't be, the political will that was created with the Formis Zero should not be underestimated. That was certainly an important stepping stone towards creating much more momentum towards a broader action to come to grips with food security in the world. And in fact, it came again out of Latin America that we actually have now this broader acceptance that we should not only reduce hunger by half, either in absolute or in even less ambitiously in relative terms, but we should actually try to completely eradicate hunger by 2025, and 28 Latin American countries committed themselves in 2006 to achieving that goal. There are also very encouraging signs coming out of Africa. You certainly know about the 10% goal that NIPA countries have set within CAADP, and that's certainly at least a positive sign, even if many countries are unable to live up to their promise. And it has been mentioned a couple of times, we heard that the G8 has committed itself to giving about $8 billion per year, or $20 billion over the next 3 years to agriculture. And actually, let me here echo the words of Joachim von Braun and just add something to that. I also take that with a little bit of caution, simply because we had quite bad experience in 2008 when we had $26 billion pledged at the summit in Rome, and to the best of my knowledge so far, we merely got $2 billion, and they went first and foremost into direct food assistance. Not that this is not important, but very little went into agricultural development. Now, that all said, and given the ambition that comes out of Latin America, we were asked to prepare essentially the background documentation for the proposition of a, well, if you so wish, a more ambitious development goal, and that's essentially eradicating hunger by 2025. Now, we were actually skeptical whether we can do it, both in terms of our own ability to do all the calculations, and then even if we had the numbers, we were a bit afraid that the numbers will be so staggering that it makes no sense and actually may actually deter the potential donors from giving more money. But actually we came up with numbers that I think are quite reasonable, and they essentially suggest that a complete eradication of hunger would be possible, and it would be possible within the means of both ODA and developing countries' money. Now, when we started off with this program, it was absolutely clear to us that we don't want to focus on agricultural production. Poverty is above all, hunger is above all a poverty problem. So the whole approach was organized around income-generating activities in rural areas. And we essentially tried to identify where the public hand, without crowding out the private hand, in fact quite the opposite, by trying to crowd in private money, where the public hand could actually provide the enabling environment for more private investment and ultimately to generate the income that is required for the poor to get out of poverty. Now, we also realized that investing just in, as it were, physical assets is not enough. There is always a certain share of the population that doesn't have access to any physical assets. The only thing they have is their own person, and so we essentially also said we have to invest in food safety, and we essentially have to invest in people directly, and we also invest in people indirectly by providing them with better institutions, by providing them with better infrastructure, and so on and so forth. Now, what was the situation, what is the situation right now actually in Latin America, and that's what you see here on that scatter plot. It essentially gives you on the y-axis the prevalence of hunger. That essentially means how many, or what's the percentage of total population that is underfed. And you see actually we have quite a diverse picture in Latin America, particularly given the fact that we have an enormous prevalence of hunger in Haiti, and we also have an enormous depth of hunger there, and we also have quite high levels of both depth of hunger and the prevalence of hunger. Perhaps a word, maybe in order here to explain what the depth of hunger is, it's essentially just the amount of calories that are on average missing for those who are undernourished, and essentially gives you a good indication of the real deprivation in terms of food deprivation for the hungry. So we actually have quite a diverse picture. We have relatively high levels in Guatemala and many of the Central American countries, Dominican Republic and Nicaragua, and we have actually quite low levels already in some of the more populous economies, particularly in Argentina and Brazil, and that's not least also because many of these countries, particularly Brazil, placed a lot of emphasis from the 2000s onwards on fighting hunger, and they were actually quite successful. Now, this is the starting situation. This is not our counterfactual. Our counterfactual is essentially a situation that would evolve anyway, even if we didn't invest more, and that's here. And you see already, if you go back, actually the cloud is moving already down. Even Haiti is making progress, although not as much as we would like to see Haiti making progress. And ultimately, if we want to measure how much money needs to be put to work in agriculture in Latin America, we essentially need to calculate the difference between this situation and this situation, where we essentially defined hunger as, well, a prevalence level below 3%, because we believe there is no such a thing as zero hunger. In every country, even in the most developed countries, we will always have a certain very low share, hopefully, of undernourishment. Now, how much money do we have to put to work? Before we did this counterfactual scenario, we first calculated how much money needs to be put to work in agriculture in rural areas in the broadest sense, including all its upstream and downstream industries. And we came up with 80 billion, but that's net gross. It's much higher. It's more than 200, it's 220 billion per year. That's